addressing, I don't know why it keeps on doing that. Addressing population decline.
Lynn, you just muted your camera. You're muted.
Yeah, it seems you're muted right now.
I don't know why. Okay, can you hear me
Now you're
now?
back.
Sorry, everybody. I am the one that's having all these tech problems. So I am Lynn Walsh. I am the co-chair of the NGO Family Committee, and I represent Universal Peace Federation. And other committee members are here. I know Vinny, my co-chair, is here, and Ben Freer, our member at large, and Roshana Chin, member at large, Elizabeth Delgado, our corresponding secretary, and I bet Marcia's on her way. And did I forget? Oh, Andreas, we're gonna recruit you to executive committee. Okay. All right. So I am really pleased to have these speakers. They're really excellent. I'm going to go through a little housekeeping. Um, um, we are having question and answers after both speakers speak. And please put your questions in the chat box, either just for the general chat or for Roshana Chin, who will be hosting our questions. Please mute yourself. That is very helpful. And also, if our behind the scenes person could put our website in the chat box, we really would love you all to look at our website and think about joining, and you can join from the website. Okay, so we are addressing population decline. And I have to say, I'm really excited. This subject is becoming more and more and more in the news, in articles, and both our speakers are really very much well informed about the situation. So, Dr. Michael Geruso, our first speaker, is Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Texas at Austin, and he's co-author of this amazing book. It's a national bestseller after the spike, Population, Progress, and Case for People. I really highly recommend it because it really argues the points that need to be understood clearly, and I must say, especially at the UN. Uh, Michael has served as a senior economist at the White House, Council of the Economic Advisors, advising on issues related to health, population, and economic policy. He earned his PhD in economics from Princeton University and completed postdoctoral research at Harvard University. He is an affiliate of the National Bureau of Economic Research and the Population Research at UT Austin, and his research has been widely published in leading journals and featured in major media. So we're really, really lucky to have him here. So, Michael, you have the floor. As
Great.
we
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you to the NGO Committee on the Family for inviting me. Um, Let me go ahead and share my screen. Are you all able to see my slides here? Great. So I'm going to talk today for the next 20 minutes or so a bit about my book, After the Spike, Population Progress and the Case for People, which is co-authored with my collaborator and fellow professor here at UT Austin, Dean Spears. And to start, I want to back up from, Lynn in her introduction mentioned about how common it is now to hear about stories of low fertility rates or impending population decline at the country level. I want to back up from looking at individual countries, and I want to look at the world as a whole, and I want to take a much longer and broader view. So for most of human history, there just were not very many people on the planet. It wasn't until 1800 that we passed about 1 billion people for the first time. 1925, we passed 2 billion people for the first time. And in the century since then, we've doubled and doubled again to the present 8.2 billion people. But the point I want to make here is that this large global human population is relatively new. It is a blip in human history. And a question that motivates me in this book is, should we expect this to continue? Should we want this to continue? A big world. Now, I think as everyone here knows, as I certainly knew growing up as a child in the 1980s, 1990s, for decades, the common worry has been about overpopulation, that there's going to be too many people on the planet, that it's going to create all sorts of material scarcity. But even all along, even back to 1968, when Paul Ehrlich published his population bomb that sort of stoked these worries and I would say fear-mongering about overpopulation, even then birth rates were falling. So we've had blips of increases in birth rates. We've had the mid-20th century baby boom, but before the mid-20th century baby boom, birth rates are falling. After the baby boom, birth rates have been falling. So it is a long trend that interestingly goes in the opposite direction of population change, which has mostly been driven by improvements in mortality, not increases in fertility. So where are we headed now? Basically, all population projections agree that we're headed towards a future with fewer than 2 children in each next generation to replace 2 adults in each last generation in terms of a global average. And of course, at the country level, many countries are already there. And so what that means is that over the next few decades, the global population will peak. Exactly when that peak happens and at what level, varies depending on which population projection you look at. The United Nations World Population Prospects puts it in the mid-2080s. Other projections, including IMHE at University of Washington, puts it decades sooner than that. But all of these projections at the highest level agree on the shape of the future, which is that within the lifetime of people alive today, the global population will peak. So what happens next? Well, to answer what happens next, you would need to take a stand on where birth rates are headed. And so as an example here, I want to imagine a projection that goes out considering the future in which the world converges to a birth rate of 1.6. I'm speaking to you from the United States. In the United States, the birth rate today is 1.6. And so in some sense, this would be a very familiar future in terms of looking around and seeing the kind of family sizes that people are choosing. Many people with 2 kids, some with 1 or none, some with 3 or more, all averaging out to 1.6. But what would that look like for the world as a whole, continued on generation after generation? Well, what that would look like is a long-run global population that would decline just as fast as the increase of the past century or two. Right? So this familiar situation of birth rates that would be common in probably all of the places of people on this Zoom call right now listening, that would lead to this profoundly different future. And to give a bit of a quantitative sense, a world that converged to an average birth rate of 1.6, total fertility rate of 1.6, and hung there for a long time would be a world that declined in global population size by 2/3 every century. So that's a sort of starting point for our book. Once birth rates fall below 2, unless they later rise and permanently remain higher, each generation will be smaller than the last. That's depopulation. That's the starting point for what I want to talk about today. I also just want to say, because I often encounter people that misunderstand what I'm saying here, I'm not assuming in making this projection out further than what the UN WPP goes out to 2100. I'm not assuming that birth rates will continue falling. Steady birth rates at a total fertility rate of 1.6 yield this future. In fact, steady birth rates at at any number substantially below 2 yield a very similar pattern of the future. So the European birth rate is around 1.4 on average. Latin America is 1.8. Any of those futures applied globally would lead to a very similar picture. Now, population science, these projections, these methodologies, cohort component methods, they answer if-then questions. And I think there's no space for disagreement about whether this projection is accurate if birth rates converge to 1.6, or if birth rates converge to 1.8, or if birth rates converge to 1.4. The only real question here is that kind of future likely? So I want to take a minute to think about whether that kind of future is likely, if that's the sort of a possibility for the default path that the world is on. And I want to argue that it is a likely enough possibility to take seriously. It's not a guarantee. And in fact, Dean and I wouldn't have written this book if we thought that it weren't possible for things to change. But I don't think we should expect things to change automatically. And that's one of the themes of what I want to talk about today. So why should we expect this as a likely possible future? Well, a first reason is that this is a globally convergent phenomenon. It's not a recent change, as I mentioned. It's been going on for as long as we have good fertility rate data back in time to document fertility rate changes over time. I talk with a lot of U.S. audiences who aren't aware that this really is not a U.S. phenomenon, or a phenomenon of a couple of relatively well-off Southeast Asian countries, or a phenomenon of modern European economies. So just as a point of comparison, birth rates are lower than the US in Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, China, Europe, Thailand, Russia, Iran, Tunisia, Turkey, Sri Lanka. That's not an exhaustive list, but I think it does give you the sense that this is a broadly shared phenomenon. It's a pattern that we find across high-income countries, middle-income countries, low-income countries, across secular and religious places, across places where the government has a larger role in the economy and a smaller role in the economy. Today, already 2/3 of people live in a country with birth rates below that 2 children per 2 adult replacement rate that would be needed to stabilize the population size at some level or another over a long time horizon. I'll give you a couple other quick ways to understand this as a likely future. The second reason is that desired fertility tends to predict actual fertility, and desired fertility today is low. So if you ask young women, if you were to look at when surveyors have asked young women 20 years ago what an ideal family size is for them, and then you fast forward the clock and you look today at how many children those women have had on average, those numbers correspond very closely. And so to give an example, today in Uttar Pradesh, India, which is a relatively poor state in India, young women 18 to 21 reported wanting just under 2 children on average in the most recent round of India's demographic and health surveys. And so what that means is that we should not expect low fertility to turn around very fast because historically what young women say they want is on average what women at the end of their careers end up with. And so that's another reason to think about low fertility as a persistent phenomenon that may take a very long time to reverse, if it reverses at all. Another way to understand a low fertility future as a likely possible future is that today sub-Saharan Africa is the only major region, only big region with high fertility rates. But fertility rates in Africa have been falling over the past few decades. The UNWPP and other projections expect African fertility to continue to fall. And that would be very consistent with the history of how fertility has fallen and how demographic transitions have rolled out in other regions of the world. As development continues, as economic opportunity improves, as education improves, as health and healthcare improve, those tend historically to go to lower and lower fertility rates. So there's lots of room for improvement in human development in Africa. And I think the most likely thing that we should think is going to happen in Africa is what's happened in every other place in the world as those improvements have unfurled. That's not to say that it'll take exactly the same path as it has in Latin America or as it has in the further back history of Europe, but we should expect that fertility decline will continue in Africa as it's been unrolling over the last few decades. Okay, so in the book, we make 3 big claims, and I've given you a preview just now of what the first big claim is, which is that no future is more likely than that people worldwide choose to have too few children to replace their own generation. And over the long run, this would lead to exponential population decline. In the center of the book, in part 2 and part 3, we make the big claim that a stabilized world population will be better overall and all things considered than a depopulating future that shrank and shrank and shrank decade after decade, generation after generation. And so I'll give a little bit of a preview of what we say about that over the next few minutes. And then where we conclude in the book is with the big claim that no one yet knows how to stabilize a depopulating world. No one yet has a formula that in any country or for the world as a whole would bring birth rates back up to replacement when they've fallen substantially below it. But we could learn and we should start learning. This might be a generational project that takes a long time to make progress on, and we should get started on that today. So I've been talking about this potentially long-run low fertility future. I haven't said anything at all about why we should care about this, but I do think that we should want to avoid depopulation. And to me, it's self-evident that a world population that falls by 2/3 each century is something that nobody should shrug off. But let me articulate with a bit more detail. One reason to care about low fertility and the depopulation that is on the horizon is that people matter for themselves. Their lives matter for themselves. Of course, the quality of life matters, but so should the number of people who get to live good lives. And I understand that that statement could leave a lot of people skeptical. And if you're left skeptical, I'd invite you to ask yourself, could it really not matter at all whether billions of people get to be born to live good lives? And I think the answer to that is no, it couldn't matter, not at all. And what that means is that what's at stake here goes beyond old age dependency ratios, worker shortages, fiscal imbalances. Those things matter, and I'm glad that there are wonky policy people attending to those things. But I think we shouldn't lose track of the fact that population is people, and we can lose track of that when we're thinking about these numbers, millions or billions. But behind each of those is a person and their life, which matters. Now, let's say that you're not moved by that, and all you care about is the quality of life lived, not the quantity. Even in that case, population still matters. It still matters for the things that you care about. And that's because progress doesn't happen automatically just because time marches forward one day, 1 year, 1 decade, 1 century. Progress happens when people achieve it. And so to ground that discussion a little bit, I want us to reflect for a moment on the fact that the good lives that we have the opportunity to live depend on the progress that other people have made. So just to give a few examples, the high yield disease resistant crops that ensure we don't risk famine next season, that depends on the work of others. The vaccines and medicines that keep us well, the public transit network or private vehicle that you took to get to work today, that never would have been made if there weren't many other people around who wanted the same thing. Similarly, the museum couldn't cover its land, building, operating costs if there weren't many other patrons, taxpayers, donors, customers who wanted to use that facility. The podcast, the news program, your favorite book, your favorite pop album, these things might not have happened in a much smaller world because it doesn't make sense for a creator to invest their time, their effort, if there are not enough people, if there's not enough big enough market of people who desire those things. I want to take a minute and hold on this idea because I think it is a super important idea to really wrestle with and understand. We live better lives, meaning less precarious, more educated, healthier, safer than people in the past, not because you and I and everyone hearing this has more grit or more intelligence or more moral integrity than people who lived in the past. We don't. It's because we enjoy the progress that others have made, and we should hope for that progress to continue. And here's the clincher, that progress depends on people. So in the book, we kind of walk through these ideas a little bit more slowly than I'll have an opportunity to now. In chapter 6, we talk about economists' notion of non-rival innovation, which is that ideas are a special kind of endlessly renewable resource. So if we take an antibiotic pill to treat a bacterial infection, that pill is gone. But the formula for the pill, the knowledge of how to produce the pill, the underlying germ theory of disease, these things all endure to be used over and over and over again. And the arrival of these broadly shared innovations depends, of course, on institutions. It depends on human capital investment. It also depends on population size. So population size is a driver of non-rival innovation. In chapter 7, we talk about how fixed cost rewards scale. So this is more in line with the idea of funding that museum. If you want next generation battery technology, for example, to decarbonize the energy grid, or you want a cure for disease, you should be glad that many other people want the same thing. It wouldn't happen without them. I think sometimes we fall into the trap of zero-sum thinking that if someone else is getting something, it must mean that we're getting less. But the reality of population economics is that when other people want and need things, it makes it more likely, not less likely, that you get the things that you need and want, because they just would not happen if there were not enough people demanding these things. And that's because a large population enables more specialization, gains from trade, and efficient scales. One comment or reaction that I always get when talking about these ideas, whether it's from people a generation ahead of me or a generation behind me, like students at UT, is the reaction that, but of course, low fertility will be a big benefit for climate and other environmental concerns. I think that's wrong. It misses something big in terms of timing. We talk a lot about this in the book. We sort of work through an integrated climate assessment model. I'm not going to do that here today, but I actually think you can very easily get the gist of this just with recognizing the timing disparity here. So if you think about what needs to happen in terms of our energy systems and industries, that could actually get us to net zero, to reductions in greenhouse gases of the magnitude that we need. Those are things that need to happen this decade and the next decade and the next. People are right when they say this is an urgent challenge, right? But let's also remember when fertility decline is projected to lead to population decline. That won't happen in the next 3 decades. It might not happen for the next 6 decades. So all the while we need to be making progress on this, affirmative progress, population will still be growing. And so the timing of these things, population decline and the need for urgent action on climate, just don't align. And that's why thinking about population decline as some sort of boon for climate is really not just wrong, but I think it's worse than wrong. It's a distraction from actually taking the affirmative steps that we need. I have a lot more to say about that. Be happy to talk about it in the Q&A. Another thing that we frequently encounter is people responding with the sort of sometimes hand-wavy, sometimes more specific notion that we might be able to count on an automatic reversal. Maybe cultures will adapt, maybe governments will respond in the event where things get really bad, when fertility gets really low and it becomes an important social, economic, political problem. I'm pretty skeptical about an automatic reversal. One thing we can do to assess the possibility of an automatic reversal is we can look at the set of countries where lifelong completed birth rates, so cohort completed fertility in demographers' language, have fallen below 1.9. Okay, so there's 24 countries that's been true in the Human Fertility Database, which is a sort of high quality database of cohort fertility rates. So we can look at the subset of these countries that have later rebounded to above the replacement rate, above 2.1, to try to get some clues about how a reversal might come about. What have these countries done? Because in many of these countries, fertility has been below replacement, not just for a few years, but for decades. And governments and citizens have expressed serious interest in turning things around. Well, unfortunately, in none of these countries has cohort fertility ever rebounded to above 2.1. And I want to be clear, that's not a guarantee that it could never happen. But it is a reason to expect it not to happen automatically in the normal course of events. So just to wrap up, I want to emphasize, and this might be a place where Dan and I disagree a little bit. I think that no one yet knows how to turn around low fertility, but we should be out there trying to find answers. And along the way, I think an important first step is building a broader consensus that children and families matter. They matter for themselves. They matter for the rest of us. I don't think that societies are going to choose to address low fertility, which may require a massive investment in children and families, if people don't first see that as a problem that actually needs to get addressed, that needs to get society's attention and resources. So I think part of the challenge here is that we should be confronting the outdated and incorrect ideas about population and scarcity, that someone else on the planet means less for me, which is just exactly opposite to what history and economics have taught us. I think we also should be investing in the social science to learn, in the policy evaluation to learn what might work to raise fertility while respecting individual rights and choice over family. I think, as a social scientist, my assessment is that we as social scientists know a lot less than we would like about the efficacy of government interventions, for example. And we should be excited to find these answers, but we should also be appropriately humble about what we don't know, which I think at this point in history is quite a lot. So I think we're at the beginning of confronting this challenge. We're maybe many years, maybe even generations away from having the answers we need, along with the social movements, the political will to actually implement these things, to invest seriously in children and families. But I think we should get started. And so I want to close with my mantra when I think about these issues, which is that this really is a social problem. This is not a problem that any individual can solve. And it really might be the case that today no one is making a mistake for their own life when they choose no children or they choose small families. I'm not here to tell them that they are, but I am here to say that I think we're all making a mistake collectively if we make it hard for people to choose children. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to the discussion and Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Geruso. You're so comprehensive. Your arguments are very clear, that we really need to correct our thinking and understanding. Um, One thing I really appreciate is, you're certainly in the UN, there's sort of discussion, well, this population discussion is about, putting women back to the old roles or back to restriction and not enough opportunity. It's really not that case at all. I think you're really calling us that more of us need to take responsibility. Um, Certainly husbands, and I think in some areas that's happening, but the society needs to realize we need to take responsibility to make having children easier and to really evaluate higher because of it benefits all of us. Even those that don't want to have children, we benefit from those that do. So
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I know we have a Q&A coming, but I really want to just plus one that, if you believe, like I do, that we all benefit from living in a big world, then you should believe that we all share responsibility in making the next generation, not just mothers, but fathers, and not just mothers and fathers, but everyone in society should be making contributions to this shared good that children and families are.
great. Yes. Anyway, thank you so much. Definitely, we look forward to the question and answers for you. So please put them in the chat box. Okay, I have a pleasure to meet the next speaker, Daniel Hess, who is a pronatalist writer and researcher. He is the man behind the social media X account titled More Births. And I know, he writes many kind of striking articles about what's going on. He's really well informed. And I know, actually, you have to update me, Dan. I know it started maybe 3 years ago. It was only just, a couple hundred people, but now it's over 40,000. How many people on
Yeah,
just?
I'm closing in on I think maybe I think 43 or 44,000, something like that, followers, including Elon Musk and quite a few other prominent people.
Okay.
So
Right. Anyway,
yeah.
just wanted to mention that. So you're certainly, providing information that is needed, just as Michael is. And Dan just returned from the first Global Fertility Crisis Forum in Hong Kong, where he did present on tackling low birth rate challenges. Um, I can't leave out that he and his wife have 6 children. Um, and I think Dan will try to address a little bit more of the areas of solutions. So, Dan, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, is that all clear for everyone? So, yes, I really want to thank Michael a lot for really uh, talking about the problem. And yeah, the birth rate. So the birth rate crisis is incredibly serious. Here's a quote from University of Pennsylvania economist Jesus Fernandez Villaverde. If we are unable to address our fertility crisis, there will be an economic crisis that could have an impact measured in the quadrillions of dollars. So, um, as Michael explained, we are looking at a kind of dramatic decline in our numbers that will have massive impacts throughout society. And here, this is just to see what we're talking about. This is a population pyramid of South Korea. Now, birth rates are many factored. There are dozens and dozens of factors that affect birth rates by 2 or 5%, but that really doesn't solve the problem. What are the giant factors, the top 5 or 6 that could potentially drive fertility 50% or 100% higher? I try to talk about There are factors that we know about. I don't want to claim that this is a solved problem. It absolutely isn't, but um, there are a lot of things that we know if we collect the best research. The first thing I want to talk about is pronatal culture. In my view, the most important factor driving fertility is pronatal culture. Very simply, do people believe in the fundamental goodness and importance of having children? There is only one developed country in the world with above replacement fertility, and that's Israel. It's crowded, it's very educated, and in fact, women in Israel have more education than men. It's high tech. This is the profile of a low fertility country, yet somehow Israel has high fertility. If you study this hard, if you talk to a lot of people, if you look at fertility desires, you find Israelis just directly believe that having children is the most important thing. It is a national mission. From the founding of Israel, all the leaders urged people to have children. In the religion, it's important and everyone agrees. It doesn't matter how you do it, just have kids. So that's a hopeful answer because technically all of us can acquire a much stronger belief in the importance of having children. So let's compare Mongolia and China. In Mongolia, you have a fertility of close to 3 births per woman. In China, right across the border, you have fertility that is only 1/3 as high. So these places have similar incomes, uh, similar levels of development, but Mongolia was in the Soviet sphere, which had a very different attitude about children from China. Um, in Mongolia, you have a strong pronatal culture, strong pronatal messages. And here's a picture you can see. Here's the president of Mongolia awarding the Order of Maternal Glory to a mother who had 6 children. Uh, Mongolia, for many decades, has had a strong culture that emphasized having children. In China, you had the opposite mentality. We heard they heard the message for decades that it's good to have fewer children. The one-child policy was not just a law, it was a belief. But we have another example in China. There's a prefecture uh, called Guangdong that that had a two-child policy instead of a one-child policy, and the culture, as emphasized by the local leadership, was very different. And to this day, Guangdong stands out within China as being a location of much higher fertility. So the next major factor is marriage. The difference in fertility between low marriage and high marriage countries is 2 times. There's not a single country in the world that achieves above replacement fertility with a low marriage rate. Um, Marriage is the ultimate pronatal technology for thousands of years. It has been the thing that supported fertility. And the funny thing is that marriage matters more now than ever before. With perfect birth control, you don't get surprises out of wedlock anymore, and uh, marriage actually ends up mattering more than it ever did in the past. So we need to sell young people on marriage. Most young people don't realize that married people are happier, married people are healthier, and people live longer, and they tend to be wealthier. So, in some sense, we don't, as a culture, I think, celebrate or sell marriage enough. And one other particular point on marriage, as it relates to uh, East Asia, where fertility has dropped the most steeply, East Asian countries had a very strong culture of arranged marriage, which has nearly disappeared. Perhaps uh, it, perhaps we should, or these countries should consider having this as an option once again. But it's not just about marriage. Marriage has to be early. There's a massive correlation between the age of marriage and fertility, at least 2 to 3 times. and the evidence is that earlier marriage was a major driver of the baby boom. Now, on the chart on the right is one that I think Michael Geruso will recognize. It's actually one of the most wonderful charts, one of the best pieces of research that has been done in recent years on fertility rates. Michael Geruso, Dean Spears, and another colleague, Lopalo, looked at the fertility rate or the fecundability of women according to age and discovered something remarkable, that fecundability, the ability to get pregnant, is extremely age dependent, and really peaks much earlier than anybody realized. So, if you consider when people in most countries, think about starting families these days, and you realize what the age fecundability curve looks like, it's very clear why we have one reason why we have such a big problem. Another factor that we need to talk about as well is religiosity. I know this makes some people uncomfortable, but good luck finding any high fertility group in the world in 2026 that doesn't have a religious basis. If we want to move the needle a lot, we need to look at big fertility factors, and religiosity is one of the biggest. What was the fastest population growth in world history? Probably America from its founding to around 1900, and religious freedom was a big part of why. Faith is an organic thing and is always changing. You can't dictate it, but it drives fertility culture like nothing else. Belief, community, optimism, and hope. Many reasons. But just having religious belief is not enough. It matters what religious leaders say and what they teach. The patriarch in the Republic of Georgia, we have one remarkable case where one man created a baby boom all by himself. The patriarch of Georgia promised that in the Orthodox Church, he would personally baptize every third or higher birth, and this is a big deal in the Republic of Georgia because that is the national church. The fertility rate shot up immediately, and religion can boost fertility, but particularly it helps if faith leaders speak about fertility and birth rates. The fourth very large factor is housing. I'm going to use the example of London, but this is true around the world. This is a fertility map of Greater London, and we see a staggering contrast in the core of London, which is high-rise towers, as we can see in the picture on the right. You have a fertility rate of just 0.55 births per woman. So astonishingly low. If that were a country, that would be lower than any country on earth. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of London, where we can see that what that looks like on the left, where people live in suburbs of single-family homes, fertility is almost at replacement, 1.5 to 2 births per woman. So it turns out, and this is not a new phenomenon. It has been known for in demography for a very long time, that as people urbanize, fertility rates tend to drop. But it turns out that there are housing modalities that make an enormous difference for fertility. And I want to point out as well a chart here on the upper right. I plotted rent per square foot and fertility rate for major cities around the world, and it turns out that the problem with low birth rates as it relates to housing doesn't seem to be primarily about cost. It seems to be primarily about housing type, because even in some places where rents are actually very affordable in a cost per square foot basis are Beijing, Shanghai, and Seoul, three of the lowest fertility cities in the world. It seems that it really has much more to do with whether housing is large enough and whether it's suitable for families. And Lyman Stone, a preeminent demographer, has reached similar conclusions. And you can see this also in maps all around the world. Let's look briefly at some economic factors. It turns out that men's income seems to be strongly correlated with fertility, but not women's income. It seems that, and this seems to be widely true, that where men are struggling, where incomes of men are low, where men are falling behind, they tend not to make great marriage partners. Women don't want to marry such men. Fertility rates tend to be much lower. Another major factor that we see in the data has to do with work-life balance. It turns out uh, that remote work is associated with much higher birth rates, which suggests that one of the major hindrances that people are experiencing that's hurting fertility is work-life balance. And a final factor that I want to talk about that is rarely talked about is C-sections. Here we see the rate of C-sections in different countries around the world, and this is seen that you can also see this in U.S. states, and the causality of this is very clear. When a woman has a C-section, she is advised by her doctor to have fewer pregnancies, or perhaps even not to get pregnant after that. And the UN, one of the UN Health Councils, I forget the name of it, but recommends that a reasonable level of necessary C-sections is around 15%. But we see that that many countries have C-section rates approaching 50 or even 60%. And typically, as I said, when women have a C-section, it operates in two different mechanisms. On the one hand, women uh, are advised to have fewer births after that, and another mechanism is that there is scar tissue in the uterus, and that harms the ability to get pregnant, fecundability as well. And so that is a simple intervention as well. Simply advise that C-sections should not be practiced unless they are truly medically necessary, and they have great value, and we're very lucky to have them. But the rate of C-sections is far above what it needs to be, and it is interesting that Israel, the highest fertility country, has actually made an effort to equalize doctor reimbursements based on whether a doctor does a C-section or a natural birth. The compensation is the same, and so there is no motivation on the part of medical professionals to lean toward C-sections, which are fertility reducing. So here we have a series of factors, and I do want to say that we don't know enough, and we absolutely need to do a lot more research, but we do know the outlines of some major factors, and I want to use the Amish as an example of a group just one state away from me. I live in Maryland. The Amish are right next door in Pennsylvania, and they have they're not merely at replacement, but have actually incredibly high fertility rates. They're an example of a group where many of these fertility factors line up well. The Amish have a strong pronatal belief. Children represent high status within Amish communities. They have a very high marriage rate. They tend to marry early. They are religious. And another factor, as I mentioned, housing matters, and the Amish spread out. They tend to live in larger houses on the land, and you line up all the factors, and you end up with very high fertility. So we don't have to be Amish to learn from the Amish, and I would propose that that we do have some important factors that we can look to solve this. Thank you very much. Lynn, are you there? Or is your system working? Maybe we need to jump over to a different moderator. It seems like Lynn is frozen.
Hello, I'll step in then. I'm not sure if Lynn is still having technical issues. Thank you so much for the presentations, Dr. Geruso and Daniel. They're so enlightening. And I'll kick off the Q&A if Lynn is not here. And I'll take moderators. We have a couple of questions from the chat box, but I'll take moderators' privilege maybe to ask a question to each of the speakers first, and then we can kick off a general discussion. So, Dr. Geruso, I thought it was a very provocative and informative presentation that you gave. The idea that ultimately, for those of us who work here at the UN, we often talk about population and very abstract, technical, quantitative concepts. But I think your challenge for us to understand it as ultimately population is people, and progress depends on people. Is something that is, I think, too often overlooked in a lot of the conversations here around population dynamics, fertility rates, replacement level fertility, et cetera. And so one of the questions I had was, in a lot of conversation on population policy at the UN, one of the concepts that's brought up is the demographic dividend. The idea that in having sub-replacement fertility level, at least for a certain part of the nation's demographic growth trajectory, that we can harness the demographic dividend to ensure that there's some technological and economic growth. And they've pointed out some examples in sort of Asian tigers, China, et cetera. And how would you respond to that argument to ensure that? I mean, I think I might know the answer. And eventually, demographic dividend might turn into demographic deficit that has to be addressed. But that's still a very live issue, and that's very salient in a lot of these population discussions. So, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So I think one thing to understand is that demographic dividend, where you have, at one point in history, you have a large working age population and you have a small number, relatively small population of children, enables some things. It enables more intense human capital investment in those children. So there certainly is, a demographic dividend. I think something else to understand about it is it's not something that you can keep repeating in history. It's sort of that demographic dividend can pay off once, and then potentially, once fertility rates stabilize at some low level, you have maybe a demographic overhang. And David Weil, professor at Brown, economist, and works on issues of demography, has a nice paper recently in the Journal of Economic Perspectives that treats this issue of population age structures and how these transitions are one-time events. So we're not getting any more big demographic dividends after we've transitioned rapidly from high fertility to low fertility. But I think so I don't want to discount that was an important historical phenomenon, but I also do want to draw attention to the fact that it's not the only economic or consequence of larger versus smaller populations. We know a lot about how large populations drive innovation and growth through market size effects. For example, you're just more likely as a drug manufacturer to do R&D on a drug for which there's a huge population of consumers, of people who need that drug. So, we have a vaccine for COVID-19 because many people think that we have a vaccine for measles, mumps, rubella, because many people would otherwise get that. We don't have a vaccine for something like sealpox, which only a few people each year get, which is a bit of a silly example, but a lot of the progress that we get really does depend on lots of people needing and wanting the same thing, and then us being able to reuse that innovation over and over and over again. So I don't want to lose that track of that economic dimension in the discussions of demographic dividends, which I think for all intents and purposes, for most of the world, the era of demographic dividends has come to an end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh, please, Daniel.
Yeah, and I'd like to, share a little bit as well. There was this, unfortunately, I think there a lot of the thinking is a little bit behind the times in terms of uh, what the figures are. And I was just in Hong Kong. The fertility in Hong Kong is something like I think in 2025 it was around uh, zero point 0.8 or 0.75 or something far below one actually. So we're talking about um, for where I just was in Hong Kong, we're talking about a population where each generation is only one third the size of the generation before. So I think the idea of a demographic dividend, there is an understandable perspective when countries are extremely poor and do have extremely high rates of growth and cannot reinvest. Uh, and that is a phenomenon that is, I think, pretty well understood. But on the opposite side, uh, there was a kind of a belief that fertility would kind of come down to replacement and then kind of settle down there. But it actually, in a lot of cases, fertility rates have blown right through the mark. There was no reason, except that people like nice round numbers to think that fertility would simply stop at two. And some of the numbers that we're seeing are just truly astonishing. China is but are either the number one or number two economy in the world, depending on how you count it. And China as a whole is only around 1.0, and it's not even at a very high level of development yet. So, in terms of its GDP, so we're talking about very dramatic decline, and I feel like my Dr. Geruso was a little bit generous by choosing 1.6 as the fertility rate that we settle at, because we're seeing in many, many countries fertility rates plummeting much more quickly below that level. And there doesn't seem to be a stopping point. There doesn't seem to be stabilization, at least not yet.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And then I had a question for you as well in light of your own presentation. That was fascinating insofar as you're not pointing to only one factor that's really responsible for self-reproductive infertility. Talk about the role of families, religiosity, marriage, healthcare system, et cetera, housing, which really shows that any effort to raise fertility levels will be an integrated approach that tackles all those different areas. One of the points you made at the beginning of the conversation that I thought was provocative was, doesn't matter how you do it, just have kids. And this made me reflect on some of the population policies that were in the 1970s, 1980s, that were coercive, that sterilization policies, forced abortions, the ICPD program of action that was adopted by the UN in the 1990s effectively responded and pushed back against some of those practices to discuss like a kind of people-centered development. And in this way, there's the focus on just numbers and the fertility rate itself relied some of the more ethical questions surrounding how we have children.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that was talking specifically in the context of the culture of Israel. That is in Israel it is just believed that it is incredibly important to have children, and the point there is that it seems that pronatal belief, the simple sort of ethos, the mindset around the value of children seems to matter a great deal. That is kind of a nebulous factor, and we shouldn't have any kind of coercion of any kind. That would be awful. But I do think culture and the messages we tell matter a great deal, and this points actually to the incredible value, in fact, of Dr. Geruso's work and others to build awareness of this situation, because I think the simple awareness that we as a culture, we as a society, we as a broader world are not having enough children, is an important driver for changing the deeper ethos, the deeper feeling around the value of children, and the fact that that humanity is wonderful and valuable, and that we should have a very positive attitude about people.
Thank you so much. And with that, now we'll start going to the questions that folks have entered into the chat. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll make sure to read them out. But the first question comes from Emily Rathel. And I put this out to both of you, whoever feels more comfortable to respond. Her question is, I'm curious to understand the ways that you've seen having kids made harder for parents. Can you elaborate on that? And I believe that might have been a comment to me that Professor Geruso made, but again, I'm afraid to chime into the design.
Sure, I'm happy to weigh in. I'll try to keep it brief. I know lots of people have questions. So, I'm not sure that I think that having children is harder today on average than it was 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I think it's probably harder than it should be. There's, one of the things that's happened, around the world, rich countries, middle-income countries, poor-income countries, is that life has gotten better. I know that could be a sort of a hard pill to swallow. There's a lot of negativity about how things are trending in individual countries and how this generation has had it harder than the last generation. But I think on many objective measures, life is just better. People live longer. They have more access to education everywhere around the world, more opportunities to have a meaningful career. So in so many ways, the world is a better place than it was 10, 50, 100 years ago. And what that means is that the choice to have children is competing against ever more appealing alternatives. So it's not so much that in any absolute sense, having a child today is harder than 50 years ago. I think, I don't think changing a diaper is worse than it was 50 years ago. I don't think any of the work that we do for our children is harder than in the past. But there are just so many other opportunities to do other things with our lives that in a way that it just wasn't even a question about in the past. There wasn't this broad variety of choice. And so what I think that means is that if we care about children, if we care about families, if we care about a sustainable future that doesn't lead to smaller generations one after another, then we should be investing in making parenting children compete in a sort of crude sense, compete better with these other alternatives that the world offers us now.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Bruce. So we'll go to the next question. This is from Susan Roylands. She says, how can help young girls have a desire to have children? Maybe brought into young people because the decisions to have children takes two to tango, right? So how do we change some of these attitudes? And particularly maybe, again, you've studied some particular communities where there has been innate desire to have children. What can the rest of society learn from, whether it's what's happening in Israel or among the Amish, certain other communities where you're seeing higher levels of fertility? What practices there, I guess best practices would you be able to share? I can help them seek that.
Well, I can maybe speak a little bit on that. I was, just in Hong Kong, and something that I spoke on, and I think it was incredibly salient because Hong Kong is part of China. I actually, emphasized unabashedly the value of religious freedom because, in China where they do not have religious freedom, and I think in some sense the organizers actually appreciated my saying that because that's something that they could not probably have the freedom to say themselves as Chinese nationals, but as a visiting Westerner, I was able to say, a thing that they were not able to say. And again, you can't make people believe any particular thing, but if there are groups that have beliefs that do support families, I think that allowing such groups to thrive and also realizing the value of those groups, suddenly in a low fertility world, groups that find ways to have higher fertility, bring a lot of value that perhaps wasn't recognized before. So I think and as well, I think there are influencers. Using that example of the patriarch of Georgia, he has a particular prominent place within the nation of Georgia, every country has, you know, influencers and culture setters. Demographer Lyman Stone has made the funny but perhaps somewhat accurate point that if K-pop stars in uh, in Korea suddenly started, talking about families and started showing how cool it was to have children, you would very likely get a baby boom in Korea. That's so each country is different, and the answer is probably different in every country and within every culture, where the sort of values come from. But I think broadly, Dr. Geruso makes an incredible point, actually, that more people, broadly speaking, is good for all of us, and we need to start talking that way and recognizing that.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Our next question comes from Moon Walsh. This is directed to Dr. Geruso. Moon asks, could you talk a little bit more about the climate change and how this has affected population fertility? Maybe if you're, I don't know if it's fears around that, or maybe unfortunately problems.
Sure. So I think this is such a big issue for so many people, and so it is like the first thing that we discuss in our book after laying out the basic demographic facts, because it's so important to so many people. It's the first thing that comes to mind. Let me take a step back from climate in particular, because I think it can feel very incredibly daunting to think about an environmental challenge that hasn't yet been solved, and I think there is a lot of despair about, can we ever solve this thing? So I wanted to think instead first about environmental problems that we have risen to the challenge of. So when I was growing up, 1980s, 1990s. Climate wasn't the thing that school children were learning about. We were learning about the hole in the stratospheric ozone layer. It's not a thing you hear about anymore because that problem is largely solved through the Montreal Protocol, banning the chlorofluorocarbons that were contributing to the depletion of the protective stratospheric ozone layer. Other problems that I heard about when I was a kid was acid rain because of sulfur dioxide emissions in the United States, or breathing in lead from leaded gasoline. We don't hear about those problems anymore. And, when my son was born in 2013, he didn't contribute to lead in the air. He didn't contribute to stratospheric ozone depletion. He didn't contribute to sulfur dioxide emissions to cause acid rain, because in each of these cases, policy, environmental awareness, political movements, and ultimately regulation and technology led to changing the relationship between humans and these environmental harms. We stopped doing them. And that is going to be the only way that we address climate change as well. So let me just take you on a little bit longer of a walk to the well. Before 1970, people in the US were breathing in leaded gasoline fumes because there was lead in gasoline, right? And at that time, the way that we addressed that was the Clean Air Act of 1970, which banned the use of lead in gasoline, right? But imagine if 1970, the political and social response to lead in gasoline was not to take it out of gasoline, analogously, not to take carbon out of our industries and energy systems, but instead to insist that we needed fewer drivers on the road. I mean, maybe we could have succeeded in getting a few fewer drivers on the road, but it just would have been an abysmal failure of actually dealing with lead and gasoline to target the drivers rather than to target the lead itself. And the same thing is true about how we're going to deal with greenhouse gas emissions. We need to take the per capita emissions. We need to reduce those down to zero. That's the only way we'll deal with climate change. And waiting around 60 years for population change to come about is not going to be a solution to that. But even if population change decline were starting tomorrow, it still wouldn't be much of a solution. Because I think we should ask ourselves, if population were to start declining next year by 1% every year, how is that actually, what is the connection from point A to B about how that's going to address climate change? To address climate change, in economies like the United States economy, we need to install solar panels and wind farms and turn on nuclear reactors and just put in place low carbon energy systems. And we need to lay transmission lines across the country to move power from where the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, to where it's not. and we need to invent and refine battery technologies. We need to invent and refine technologies that don't yet exist, like low carbon concrete. These things will not happen simply because the population starts falling. And the carbon reduction from a smaller population is just too little, too late to actually deal with climate change. So I know that was a bit of a long answer, but I think it's an important issue to really get our heads around squarely.
Yeah, I just want to make a tiny little addition to that. Some incredible news has been coming out of China, which is that they're going they're having incredible volumes of solar installation and a massive transition to electric cars. So they are actually leading the way. China has become incredibly innovative, actually, and many East Asian countries, and so the ones that are leading the way in a lot of these most advanced energy technologies are actually East Asia. So we should be kind of alarmed, actually, that population decline may limit the ability of solutions to come from these places.
Our next question comes from Elizabeth Danielle. She asked, do any of the speakers believe that birth rates are influenced by religious beliefs? Have any studies been made regarding this idea? Now, Daniel, I know that you mentioned the role of religious leaders in spurring birth rates, sometimes single-handedly, but in terms of the underlying beliefs, the children themselves are good in and of themselves, as fecundity is a blessing from God. Perhaps something like that. Could you go to share any studies or?
Yeah, I actually, if you'll give me a moment, I actually have a thread. That is actually one of the strongest relationships established in numerous studies, that higher religiosity is associated with higher fertility on an individual basis and on a national basis. So I'm just gonna paste that into the chat so I don't so people can see a lot of the studies that show that.
Thank you so much for that. And again, if you don't know how to use the Zoom chat, just click on the chat function on the bottom of your screen, and you can see the link that Daniel just posted. I'll go on to our next question, and this is from Anu Hassan. And again, I'll throw this out to both the speakers. What is your view on the incentives that the Hungarian government has introduced to support families with children? Now, to provide some background, Hungarian government has introduced things like tax subsidies, housing allowances, lifetime income tax benefits for mothers with a certain amount of children and more. So, how would you both respond to sort of top-down government policies that support families of children?
Daniel, would you like to?
Oh, sure,
go
sure,
first?
sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just put into the chat a thread of a lot of different studies that have shown the connection between religiosity and fertility. Now, that's not the only factor, but it is an important one. And to talk about Hungary, actually, that is a great example of how perhaps culture has gotten in the way of government policy. It turns out, and a study I posted this week showed that pronatal policy, in terms of government benefits, had a strong effect on people that had grown up with in a religious household, but it had very little effect on people that had not. That was a study in the in the Baltic region, and that kind of shows that you need a couple things to happen. You need kind of the motivation or the reason for people to want to have children. On the one hand, has to meet good conditions. So you have an interplay of culture and sort of policy and conditions. And I think Hungary is an example of where certain cultural forces are working against Hungary. One thing that's happening in Hungary and a lot of traditional traditionally Catholic countries is that fertility is declining pretty rapidly in, shall we say, formerly Catholic majority countries, not just Hungary, but Poland, Spain, Italy, Chile, and a lot of the Latin American countries. We're seeing particularly steep declines, and a big reason for that seems to be that that these formerly Catholic countries are undergoing a particularly steep secularization. So that's one reason why pronatal policy is a little bit less effective than it could be in Hungary. Another reason is that Orban is not especially popular among young people. So the in some sense it would really be more effective if pronatal efforts were coming from a source that young people that resonated with young people. But nevertheless, I think we have to look at the counterfactuals, and I think Hungary's fertility, you know, probably about 20 years ago was maybe among the 4 or 5 lowest nations on earth, and now Hungary is somewhere in the top half of Europe. So Hungary, you have to look at the counterfactual, and I think Hungary's efforts and policies have been significantly positive in relation to what they otherwise would have been. And again, this is very multi-factored.
I think that leads well into our next question. It's from Susan Sepperson. She also mentioned the situation of Hungary and the families there, as well as Israel. And we've talked a lot about religiosity in influencing fertility rates, but given that there is declining religiosity across different regions, what kind of ideas would have salience and resonance among those who are secular to help you understand some of the implications of subreplacement fertility level? And I believe Professor Geruso alluded to some of this in terms of for those who don't see an innate value in terms of to people themselves, the world we live in is shaped by population. And perhaps, Professor, you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on that. How can we modify cultural practices that for those who aren't religious to understand the implications of subreplacement fertility level and the value of people in general?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I think this is it's a huge challenge. I think there's, it's in some sense, it's at least in some cultures in the United States, it's become almost fashionable to talk about other people as a burden or a source of scarcity. Another person is a reason that you're not getting a job. Another person is a reason you're not getting a home. Another person is a reason, the environmental movement for material scarcity or environmental degradation. And I think, even outside of religious context, there is sometimes there is and I apologize if this offends anyone to call it this, but there's almost like a quasi-religious belief, non-spiritual quasi-religious belief in other people on the planet as a source of harm. And I think we should be, as individuals, another person in the chat was asking, what can an individual do? I think as individuals, we should not only recognize that we're not in a zero-sum world when it comes to other people. Other people make lives better, but we should challenge our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues to have that conversation with them. And, if you're feeling particularly bold, then, maybe the next time someone says, something that's disparaging about another person on the planet, call them out in the way that in some communities in the United States, if on a much more micro scale, we have what I think is an erroneous view of immigrants as a zero-sum immigration is a zero-sum game, that if an immigrant is coming to my country, it must mean that there's less for me. I don't think that's right. And, the same circles in the United States, like left of center policy circles who would really take issue and offense with talking about immigration as a source of scarcity, nonetheless reflect that same sort of scarcity mindset when it comes to other people on the planet, as opposed to, another person immigrating to their country. And so I think, across the political spectrum, we should be challenging these ideas that other people are a source of scarcity. We should be challenging these ideas that other people are a source of environmental harm rather than what people do and the policies and regulations that we put in place to protect the environment. and just start having those conversations, because I do not think that we're going to make this is a point that I think is very much in agreement with Daniel. I don't think that policy, fertility, perinatal policy in itself is going to bring birth rates up from where they are now in many rich countries, 1.2, 1.4, 1.5, 1.8. Those fertility rates are not going to rebound to above replacement fertility if there is not a broadly shared social consensus that other people on the planet are good. They're good for themselves. They're good for everybody else.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I think that those are wonderful, wonderful points. I don't know if you have another question you wanted to get onto, or if I can jump in on this one as well a little bit.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that even outside of a religious context, the messages and the culture that we have, does matter a great deal. One interesting point is that if you look at within Israel, even secular people, a non-religious, non-believer in Israel will have approximately twice as high fertility as such a person in another country that's comparable in education and income and so forth, and that suggests that independent of religion, there is the ideas and the stories of how we see people and how we see children does matter a great deal. And another example of that as well is if you look in the United States, you across the political aisle, there's a very large difference actually in fertility, where on the left side of the aisle, fertility is only about half, in the latest figures I've seen, only about half of what it is on the right side of the aisle, at least in terms of if on an individual basis. And some of that probably does have to do with religiosity, but a lot of that has to do with there is kind of a particular pronatal culture that exists more on the right in the United States right now than on the left, and it didn't used to be that way. If you look back in the 1980s, for example, there was no difference at all in the fertility rate between Democrats and Republicans in the United States. But I do think that particularly on the left, which is incredibly important. And I've joked with people that I'd give a limb of my body to see a more strong, way of expressing this from that side, from the more left of center, side of the aisle, because I do think that more young people tend to be on the left than on the right. More young women particularly tend to be on the left than on the right. And so I think, and I think Professor Geruso as well. I'm an incredible fan. One of the brilliant aspects of this book, of which I made an early review of. I love this, but it really makes the case in a way that speaks more to people on that side of the aisle, and I think that there needs to be a lot of that from many different perspectives, because certainly the religious perspective isn't going to be enough. That's only a slice of the population. We need to see these narratives and these understandings come from different types of speakers and different angles.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And with that, we are at time, but I want to thank both of the speakers for a very interesting, provocative discussion. I think there's a lot of food for all of us. The NGO Committee and the Family, we will upload this onto our website. Please check Google NGO Committee and the Family New York to find out about our upcoming events. And I'll pass the floor to Lynn if you would like to close.
Thank you. I just want to say I am so sorry. My laptop battery actually died, but I love my team. You jumped in and took over. Professor Geruso and Daniel, you're just excellent. So thank you very much. And everybody, please spread the word, join us. And if you want to look at the video, which will come up. Thanks so much, Roshana. You did an excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.